The late afternoon sun cast a pale yellow glow over the Arizona valley. The wind blew through the dry cottonwood, stirring up red dust that coated his boots and coat. Ethan Carter, 37, slowed his old horse along the north fence. Since his wife died of a fever 3 years ago, the ranch had been all he and the silence, a silence sometimes heavier than the gunshots of his scouting days for the Army. Ethan stopped his horse by the shallow stream. The water this season only shimmered in small pools between the rocks. But right around the bend, something made him stop. Not deer. The faint outline of a person. He stepped down, his boots crunching in the dry grass, his hands unconsciously near the butts of his rifles. Then he saw them. 3 young Apache girls, their clothes torn and soaked, huddled against the rock. Their eyes were wide like cornered animals. Their bare feet were bleeding, their arms were covered with bruises. A trembling man whispered hoarsely, "They've taken everything. Cowboy, please help us." Ethan was silent. Over the years, he had learned one thing: don't interfere in other people's business. But in that look, in the fear and despair exposed, he couldn't turn away. Slowly, he took off his leather jacket and held it out to them. The eldest sister timidly took it, her eyes shining with a glimmer of hope. Ethan didn't ask any more questions. He just nodded, helping each of them onto the horse's back. Small, weak hands clung to his shoulders, trembling with the rhythm of his hooves. The road back to the cabin was longer than usual. The desert wind was still dry, but there were now 3 trembling breaths between his back, hot and cold. Ethan knew clearly. From tonight, the wooden house that was only darkness and silence would no longer be his own place. If you want to know what happens when Ethan brings the 3 Apache girls back to the cabin, stay tuned for the next chapters. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on emotional Wild West love stories. Ethan Carter's log cabin was nestled in the middle of an Arizona valley, simple with 4 walls, a narrow bed, an old wooden table, and a small fire in the corner. Since his wife's death, the place had been empty, like a cold shell he used to live in rather than live in. But tonight, the fire in the fireplace had 3 more eyes watching, making the already quiet room suddenly strange. The 3 Apache girls sat huddled near the stove. They wrapped his coat tightly, their eyes still alert like small birds that had just escaped a net. Naya, the eldest, hugged her 2 younger sisters tightly, her eyes both wary and fierce. Tala, the youngest, trembled, her small hand clutching the edge of her coat. And Awinida, the girl in the middle, glanced at Ethan and then bowed her head, as if not knowing what to believe. Ethan didn't ask. He just lit more firewood, boiled water, and rummaged through the wooden chest for some remaining dry food. The steam and smell of stewed beans wafted in, dispelling the harshness outside. He set 3 tin bowls on the floor. The 3 girls looked at each other, then slowly took them. They ate slowly, but each spoonful seemed to restore some of their lost energy. As the fire burned brightly, Ethan sat down in a corner, quietly picking up a needle and thread. He picked up the torn, mud-covered dress, patiently sewing each clumsy stitch. Each stitch was crooked, but his large hands were surprisingly careful. Naya watched for a long time, her eyes searching for an answer. Was this man an enemy or a rare refuge? The wind outside whistled through the cracks, but inside the cabin, the sound of firewood crackling, light dancing on 4 faces. Tala fell asleep in her arms, Awanita gradually relaxed, and Naya remained sitting upright, her eyes meeting Ethan's. He did not speak, but his silence was no longer indifferent. It was the silence of someone experienced, knowing that sometimes safety lies not in promises, but in quiet actions. When the last dress was sewn, Ethan put it down beside them, then stood up to add more firewood to the stove. Naya nodded slightly, a small gesture but enough for Ethan to understand. The line of suspicion had loosened a little. That night, the 3 girls slept wrapped in blankets by the fireplace. Ethan spread a thin mattress on the floor, sat with his back against the wall, the gun within reach. He did not dare to sleep deeply. But in the flickering yellow light of the fire, for the first time in years, he felt the cabin was not as cold as before. The first dawn since their arrival, light filtering through the cracks in the cabin. Ethan Carter had been up long ago, accustomed to rising early since he had started running the farm alone. He heard a faint noise behind him. Tala, the youngest, tiptoed to the doorway, her bare feet still covered in scratches. Ethan didn't stop her. He just nodded, then pointed to a pair of old shoes on the porch. Tala looked at him, hesitated for a moment, then timidly put them on. The shoes were too big, but her little eyes lit up as if she had just been given a treasure. Naya, the eldest, walked behind her. Her face was gaunt, her eyes were dark from many sleepless nights, but her gait was still proud. She didn't speak, just pulled the leather jacket around her shoulders tighter. Ethan handed her a bucket, then pointed to the well. Water. Naya frowned, but finally nodded. Owinita, the girl in the middle, was still sitting in the cabin, mending the shirt he had sewn yesterday. The stitches were still clumsy, but her slender hands added neat stitches. Ethan glanced over, smiling slightly. The house had begun to change. That morning, they ate corn stew together. The three girls were no longer as reserved as the first night. Tala giggled as she poured the corn out of the bowl, prompting her older sister to sternly admonish her. Owinita watched the scene, the corners of her lips curling slightly, then quickly hiding them. Ethan sat at the head of the table, silently watching, feeling like he was looking at a family, not three strangers. During the day, Ethan led them to the north fence. The wind blew their long black hair. The desert dust stuck to their skin, but it didn't slow their steps. Naya held the wooden hammer firmly, hitting the stake firmly. Tala ran around picking up dry branches, looking up at him as she worked, waiting for praise. Owinita carefully stretched the rope, her eyes focused as if she wanted to do it right. Ethan watched, secretly amazed. They weren't the burdens people in town made them out to be. They wanted to do things, to prove themselves. Perhaps for these three girls, working was more pleasant than sitting around waiting to be pitied. At noon, the group sat down to rest under the shade of a cotton tree. Ethan divided the water, quietly handing it to each of them. Tala mumbled a thank you in halting English. It was the first time he'd heard a word from their mouths that wasn't filled with doubt. As the afternoon sun fell, the four returned to the cabin. The fire was lit again, this time with soft laughter. Owinita sat near the light, mending another shirt for Ethan. Naya chopped vegetables, and Tala kept chattering to him about the names of the animals on the farm. Ethan didn't answer much, but in his heart, a void had begun to fill. Night fell. He placed the gun next to the bed as usual, but this time, the steady breathing of the three girls made the darkness less heavy. The cabin was no longer just a shelter, but began to feel like a home. If you want to continue following the journey of Ethan and the three Apache girls, where friendship gradually blossomed in the dangerous West, please subscribe to the channel and join us in the next Wild West love stories. The town of Prescott was nestled in a red dust valley, where the main road was a rickety strip of wood lined with shops. Every afternoon, when the sun beat down from the mountains, men gathered outside Jensen's tavern, where cigarette smoke and the smell of cheap whiskey created a thick fog. That day, the chatter grew faster than usual. A man rode in from the north, his mouth full of news stories. I saw it with my own eyes. Carter, that taciturn widower, he brought home 3 Apache girls. The whole tavern erupted. An old man slammed his glass down on the table, his voice bitter. Indians? After all the bloodshed, he brings them home? In the corner, Clay Jensen raised his head, his eyes cloudy with alcohol. He was about 20, the son of the tavern owner. Clay had been used to being a jerk since he was a child, and he never missed an opportunity to cause trouble. He smirked, took a drag of his cigarette, and said bitterly, "Carter keeps wild animals in his house? Does he think he's a savior? Maybe he forgot that Apache blood once stained this land red." The young men around him burst into laughter, their laughter filled with drunkenness and contempt. One of them tapped Clay on the shoulder and mocked him. "If he likes, let me and you go up there and drag the girls out onto the street so the townspeople can see clearly." Clay tapped his cigarette on the table, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "Not yet. But one day I'll make Carter remember that he can't stand alone against the whole town." Rumors spread faster than desert winds. From the grocery store to the blacksmith shop, people whispered. Ethan Carter was harboring 3 Apache girls on the ranch. Some shook their heads in disdain, Others remained silent, but everyone's eyes held a trace of suspicion. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Ethan had no idea. He still led the three girls around the fence, showing them how to stake more firmly, how to gather dry wood and tie bundles of straw. Naya worked hard. Awinita was meticulous, and Tala was small but kept running back and forth, her face gradually brightening after days of fear. In the afternoon, when the four of them sat resting under the porch, Ethan suddenly saw Naya's eyes looking far away toward the town. She pursed her lips, then spoke softly in slow English. "White people, they don't forget." Ethan didn't answer right away. He knew her words were not only a painful memory, but also a warning. In his years of scouting, he had seen entire villages wiped out by a single rebellion. And he knew the peace in the cabin was temporary. That night, Ethan sat alone with his cold coffee as the fire burned in the kitchen. The three girls had fallen asleep near the fireplace. Outside, the wind blew hard, carrying dust and sand against the wooden walls. Naya's words from the afternoon echoed in his head. In Prescott, rumors had taken root. And at Jensen's, Clay had begun to plot. Ethan knew that sooner or later, trouble would come to this house. That morning, Ethan Carter tied up his horse and decided to go to Prescott. The ranch was starting to run low on salt, coffee, and some wire-to-mend fences. He didn't like the hustle and bustle of the town, but living in the West, you couldn't rely on anyone but yourself. The town opened up in the hot Sunday. The wooden path clanged under his boots, and the smell of coal smoke and sweat mixed together. Ethan walked straight into the grocery store, bought what he needed quickly, and packed up. He was about to turn back when the noise from Jensen's tavern seeped out, like a net pulling his steps to a halt. Inside, a group of young men were shouting around a card table. Glasses clinked, and laughter filled the air with the smell of alcohol. In the corner of the tavern, Clay Jensen leaned back in his chair, a half-smile on his face, challenging him. When he saw Ethan, he tapped his fingers on the table, loud enough to make everyone quiet down. "Look, Carter," Clay said, his voice dripping with drunkenness. "The hero who keeps wild animals in his house." The crowd laughed. Ethan didn't change his expression, just slowly put his bag down on the floor. He walked to an empty table and ordered coffee instead of whiskey. A murmur rose behind him, half mocking, half curious. Clay didn't miss it. He stood up and swayed closer, the smell of alcohol coming from him. "You think you can hide them forever? The whole town knows. Those three savages don't belong here." Ethan raised his head, his deep blue eyes staring straight at Clay, his voice low. "They are guests in my house. Whoever touches them, I will deal with them." The atmosphere in the bar suddenly became heavy. The young men stopped laughing, waiting to see what Clay would do. Jensen, the younger, curled his lips, hissing through his teeth. "Guest? Or is it something you want to keep for yourself?" Ethan's fingers lightly touched the belt strap, where the Colt still lay motionless. He didn't draw his gun, just leaned forward, his words as short as a hammer blow. "Try taking one more step. See what happens." A moment of silence. Then Clay burst out laughing, but the smile was forced, his eyes averted. He waved his hand, signaling to his friends, "Let's go. This fun isn't over yet, Carter." The bar door opened, light flooded in, and the sound of their shoes faded away. Ethan sat back, sipping his bitter coffee. He knew from now on, the danger was no longer a rumor. It has become a public threat. Outside, the wind blew dust along the wooden street. Ethan's mind flashed with images of the three Apache girls: small Tala, silent Awinita, and knife-eyed Naya. They had come to him empty-handed. Now, he had to prepare for the storm that was about to hit. Ethan and the three Apache girls' days of peace were running short, as the threat was made public in the town. Can they hold their home against the storms of the West? Follow along in more Wild West love stories. And if you find this one memorable, subscribe to continue their journey. The next morning, the sun had just risen above the mountains, casting a golden light over the Arizona Valley. Ethan Carter left the cabin, carrying a shovel and a bundle of rope. He was about to repair the fence of the stable, but when he turned, he saw three small figures following close behind. Naya, the eldest, walked slowly but surely, her face determined. her hands gripping the wooden hammer he had given her. Awinita held a few stakes, her figure thin but her eyes focused. Tala trotted behind, carrying a few bales of hay, her mouth chattering. Ethan paused for a moment, then nodded slightly. He was used to working alone, but today there were 3 pairs of hands. The west fence was rotten, some stakes broken, the wire loose. Ethan drove in new stakes. Naya raised her hammer and hammered them down firmly. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but her eyes did not waver. Beside her, Awinita stretched the rope, skillfully threading each loop, her hands clumsy at first but gradually becoming proficient. Tala ran around picking up pieces of wood. Each time Ethan praised her, she giggled, lightening the atmosphere. At noon, they sat down to rest under the shade of a cotton tree. Ethan divided the water in the canteen, giving it to each person. Naya took a sip and nodded slightly, as if to say thank you without saying anything. Awinita sat quietly, using a small knife to peel the piece of wood, her eyes sparkling as she saw the shape of the needle gradually appear. Tala lay on the grass, her shoes too big and loose on her feet, but she still held on tight for fear of losing them. As the evening sun set, the group returned to the cabin. Ethan lit the stove while the 3 girls prepared dinner. Naya sliced corn, Awinita chopped vegetables, and Tala picked beans. The fire flickered, and the smell of food filled the air. Ethan watched the scene, suddenly feeling warm inside. The empty cabin was now filled with footsteps, the sound of knives and chopping boards, and soft laughter. After the meal, they sat together by the oil lamp. Ethan repaired the old saddle, Awinita patched a torn shirt, and Naya brushed Tala's hair. In that moment, there was no more vigilance, no more distance. There were only 4 people who had found a rare peace in a world that always wanted to take it away from them. Ethan leaned against the wall, watching the 3 girls. He suddenly realized that this was no longer charity or compassion. This was a new family taking shape, though no one had yet said it out loud. Night fell, the wind howled outside through the cracks in the door, but inside the cabin the fire burned brightly, illuminating 4 faces sitting side by side. And for the first time in years, Ethan Carter felt like he was no longer alone. That afternoon, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke from the north. Ethan Carter, mending the horse's trough, raised his head, his eyes narrowing. The smoke wasn't from the family fire. It was thick, acrid, and drifting slowly, signaling a group of people camped nearby. The 3 Apache girls noticed too. Naya stepped onto the porch, her face tense. Awinita paused in her blanket shaking, her gaze on the mountains. Tala crouched behind her, her small hands clenching her shirt. They all understood without explanation, the enemy might be close. Ethan gathered up his tools, set the Winchester on the cabin table. He showed Naya and Awinita how to load it and pointed out where to hide behind the planks if needed. They hesitated at first, but as their trembling hands gripped the stocks, the look in their eyes changed not just fear, but determination. Dinner that night was silent. Every whistling wind outside the window startled them. Tala ate a few spoonfuls and put down the bowl, her big round eyes fixed on the crack of the door. Ethan put his hand on her shoulder, reassuring her, "It's okay. As long as I'm here, no one can touch you." When the night fell, Ethan turned off the oil lamps, leaving only the dim light of the stove. The cabin was immersed in darkness, but everyone could clearly feel their heartbeats pounding. Ethan sat close to the door, his gun placed across his knees, his eyes fixed on the dark shadow in the yard. The 3 girls wrapped in blankets sat close together, like 3 small candles trembling in the storm that had not yet arrived. The sound of insects stopped, only the wind whistling through the cracks in the wood. In that moment, Ethan felt the fragility of their peace. He knew that Clay Jensen and his friends would not let this go. Soon, the confrontation was inevitable. Outside, the sky was starless. Only dark clouds hung heavy as if covering the entire valley. And inside the cabin, 4 people sat close together, silently waiting. The storm was approaching, and Ethan's small home with 3 Apache girls was about to become the front line. Will they be able to stand firm? Let's follow the next Wild West love stories. And if you are as excited as they are, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue accompanying the story. Night fell faster than usual. On the Arizona prairie, the desert wind blew cold, carrying a strange smell of smoke from the north. Ethan Carter's cabin was dark, save for the dim glow of the fireplace. He sat by the door, his Winchester rifle across his knees, his eyes straining to keep an eye out for movement in the yard. The three Apache girls, wrapped in blankets, sat close together by the stove. No one spoke, only the wind whistling through the cracks in the door and the pounding of their hearts. Naya, the eldest, was the one to break the silence. She looked at Ethan, her voice low but firm. "They'll come." Ethan nodded, not denying it. He knew from their meeting at the bar that Clay Jensen wouldn't let it go. Men like him lived on alcohol and the approval of his friends when challenged. He had all the more reason to prove himself. He stood up, motioning the three girls to the wooden table. From the floor, he pulled out an old crate. Inside were several old but serviceable rifles, along with a bag of ammo. Naya looked, her eyes hesitant, but then she nodded. Owenita quietly took one, her hands trembling but clutching tightly. Tala, the smallest, clung to her sister's shirt, her eyes wide, fearful but determined to stay. Ethan lowered his voice. "If they try to break the door, I'll go out first. You girls hold the door, shoot if necessary, but only if necessary." Naya translated for the two girls in their native language. Owenita nodded quickly. Tala buried her face in her sister's shoulder, but then she also held onto the gun, like a small promise. Outside, the sound of horse hooves echoed, distant at first, then closer, mixed with the giggling of drunks. Ethan lifted the Winchester, his grip white with his knuckles. He signaled to turn off the kerosene lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness. Silver moonlight spread across the ground. From the shadows of the trees, three figures emerged. Clay Jensen was in the lead, a half-smile still lingering under his wide-brimmed hat. Behind him were two young men, their faces immature but their eyes flashing with aggression. They walked slowly, deliberately making noise, like cats playing with mice. "Evening, Carter," Clay called out, his voice drawn out mockingly. "With such a beautiful day, why don't you invite your friends in for a drink?" There was no response. Ethan hid in the doorway, watching. They approached the stable. One of them tried to open the gate, and the horse whinnied in alarm. Clay laughed, his voice lost in the night. "Just wanted to see if those Indians were sleeping peacefully in your house." That was enough. Ethan unlatched the door and pushed hard. The door swung open, the hinges ringing in the night. He stepped out, Winchester pointed straight at him. His voice was deep, decisive, thundering in the silence. "Put the gate down. Back off." The three men paused. Clay looked at Ethan, the moonlight illuminating his arrogant smile. He spread his arms as if welcoming. "We just want to talk. Or are you that scared?" Ethan didn't move. The barrel of his gun still pointed straight. "This is my land. Take another step, and you're trespassing." The air was thick in that moment. The crickets stopped. The whole field was filled with a stifling silence. Clay glanced at the two of them, saw their confusion. He sneered, but his smile was more forced than before. "Carter, you can't keep those three savages forever. They don't belong here." In the cabin, Naya and Owenita were already standing behind the door, guns in hand. Tala sat huddled in the corner, her eyes wide but not taking her eyes off her. Naya listened to every word Clay said, blood rushing to her face. She shouted through the crack in the door, her voice filled with anger. "We're staying. This is home." The scream echoed, making Clay freeze for a moment. Ethan took another step, his voice as deep as steel. "You hear me, Jensen? They chose to stay, and I won't let anyone touch them." The man with Clay whispered, "Clay, stop it. It's not worth it." But Clay gritted his teeth, his eyes flashing with humiliation. He spat on the ground, then backed away step by step. "Fine, Carter," he growled. "But remember, this night isn't over." The three figures turned their horses and galloped away, kicking up dust. The sound of hooves faded away, leaving a heavy, tense void. Ethan lowered his gun, his shoulders relaxed, but his eyes still watched the darkness, waiting for a surprise. When he walked back into the cabin, Naya and Owenita were still standing behind the door, guns clenched in their hands. Tala rushed to hug her, tears streaming down her cheeks. Ethan put the Winchester down on the table, breathing hard. "They're gone," he said. Naya looked up, her eyes shining with both fear and pride. "They will come back." Ethan nodded. "I know, but when they do, they will have to face all four of us, not just me." Inside the cabin, the fire flickered back to life. Four people sat around the stove, tired but proud. Tonight, they stood together, and the line between rescuer and rescued was gone. Outside, the desert wind still howled through the valley. But inside the cabin, the four knew. They had just weathered their first night as a family, and the real storm had only just begun. That morning, the Arizona sun beat down on the town of Prescott like a scorcher. Ethan Carter led his horse down the main street, Naya and Awinita following behind, Tala clutching her hand, eyes wide with fear. They knew this day would be different. Clay Jensen had spread the rumor, and the truth could not be hidden behind the cabin walls forever. People stopped what they were doing when they saw them. A woman arranging vegetables in front of the grocery store stopped, her hand frozen in a basket of tomatoes. A group of young men leaned against the door of the tavern, whistling mockingly. An old man sat in a rocking chair in front of the blacksmith shop, his eyes narrowed in judgment. Ethan walked straight, shoulders square, eyes focused. But each step seemed to add weight to the air. Tala trembled, Naya squeezed her hand, and Awinita bowed her head, as if to disappear into the crowd. Clay waited in front of Jensen's. He crossed his arms, a smirk on his face. When Ethan and the three girls stopped, he shouted loud enough for the whole street to hear. "Here at Island Carter, you brought your treasure to show off to the whole town? Or do you want us to see what a traitor you have become?" The crowd murmured. A woman shook her head, pulling her young son away. A man shouted angrily, "Indian women have no place here." The voices followed, like a rising tide. Ethan stopped, turned to face everyone. He took off his hat, his deep blue eyes staring straight into the crowd. His voice rang out, hoarse but firm, "I don't need anyone's permission to decide who comes into my house. These three girls are not a burden, not an enemy. They are my protectors. And from now on, whoever tries to touch them will have to go through me first." A sudden silence fell. The wind blew red dust across the street, the sound of wooden door hinges creaking. Naya stood next to Ethan, her dark eyes shining. She took a half step forward, speaking firmly in English, her voice still slurred but clear enough. "We won't run away anymore. This is our home." Awanita took Tala's hand, lifted her chin. Tala was confused, but finally spoke, small but resonant. "We stay." With him, the murmuring broke out again. Some were angry, but others hesitated. An old man who had been a soldier, leaning on a cane, stepped out, his voice hoarse. "Carter is right. Over the years, we have lost a lot because of hatred. Now if he wants to keep them as family, that is his business." Clay sneered, his eyes full of challenge. He stepped out into the middle of the street, pointing at Ethan. "You think a few words will change things? No, Carter. You are challenging this whole town, and I promise, one day you will pay." The crowd split into two groups. One side nodded, the other threw a contemptuous look. Ethan didn't draw his gun, didn't growl. He just put his hat back on his head, then spoke slowly, each word etched into the air. "I don't need to change the whole town. I just need to keep my roof." With that, he turned and led the three girls away. The crowd dispersed, their eyes following the four backs as if they were trying to pierce them, but no one dared to block their way. As they left Prescott, the wind from the valley blew red dust over the street. Naya held Tala's hand. Anita walked close to Ethan. No one spoke, but for the first time, there was a gleam of pride in the three girls' eyes. Ethan knew things were just beginning. Clay wouldn't let it go. But today, in front of the whole town, they had come out. And it was a step from which there was no turning back, a step that made them family. At night, as the small cabin emerged into the sunset, the four of them entered as if returning to a fortress. Outside, public opinion may rage, but inside the wooden walls, they chose to stand together. Ethan lit a fire in the kitchen. As the flames rose, Naya placed her hand on his shoulder, her eyes thanking him without words. Awinita spread a blanket for Tala, then looked up at him as if to say, they believed him. Ethan sat down, the firelight illuminating his fatigue but also his unwavering determination. Tonight, they were not just fighting the darkness outside. They had dared to declare, this place was home, and that no force could erase. In the harsh West, public words were sometimes more dangerous than bullets. Ethan and the three Apache girls chose that step, to face the whole town. Do you believe that family and courage can withstand hatred? Continue to follow the next Wild West love stories. And if this story touches you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the journey ahead. The morning light fell on the Arizona Valley, evaporating the thin mist on the grass. Ethan Carter carried his old hoe to the back of the cabin. The land was dry and barren, and for years he had only sown hay for his cattle, never thinking of a real garden. But today was different. Naya followed, holding a bag of corn and beans that Ethan had traded from town. Awenata carried a bucket of water, and Tala busied herself with a small basket containing a few seed potatoes. The three Apache girls stood in a circle around him, their eyes filled with something more than gratitude-hope. Ethan drove his hoe into the ground, each stroke firmly. Naya stepped forward, not speaking, just took the hoe and continued. The lean muscles under her dark shirt tensed, each stroke steady and decisive. Awenata knelt down, using her hands to turn the soil into ridges, placing the corn kernels neatly. Tala carefully placed the potatoes down, covering them with a thin layer of soil. The sun rose high, sweat soaked their shirts, but no one gave up. Ethan watched them, his chest filled with strange emotions. For years, he had only worked hard to forget the loss. But now, each hoe stroke, each seed planted in the ground had a different meaning. Sowing a new beginning, not just for the season, but for life. By noon, when the last furrow was filled, the four of them sat under the shade of the cotton trees. A cool breeze blew through, carrying the scent of fresh earth. Tala laughed loudly, raising her dirty hands to show off. Awenata smiled gently, adjusting her skirt. Naya, though still stern, had a soft look in her eyes as she looked at the furrows, as if a smoldering fire was burning. Ethan poured water and passed it around. He looked at the three girls, then at the field in front of them. In that moment, the small cabin was no longer just a shelter. It had become a shared land, where seeds were planted not just to stave off hunger, but to give them the belief that tomorrow could be different. The wind blew hard, carrying red dust, but the four of them sat side by side, steadfast. On the barren land, they had planted the first seeds, and with them, the belief in a real home. Dusk fell over the Arizona prairie, blanketing the valley in a soft orange glow. Ethan Carter's small wooden cabin cast a warm glow from the window, like a beacon in a sea of wild grass. Inside, the fire in the stove was blazing, the pot of beans was bubbling, the aroma filled the house. Naya sat at the table, her strong hands skillfully weaving a wicker basket to store the new corn. Awenata carefully cut a piece of cloth, mending Ethan's work shirt. Tala ran around, laughing as she arranged the potato seedlings into the basket. Her laughter rang out, clear as silver bells, making the house brighter than the oil lamp. Ethan stood quietly in the corner, watching the three girls. In the dancing light of the fire, he saw the change clearly. From three lost people shivering on the first night, they were now three souls bound together, merging into this roof. There was no longer any distance between the widower and the three Apache girls. Only one family remains, the peace that fate placed in him at the very moment he thought he had lost everything. That night, they sat around the wooden table, sharing a simple meal. Ethan raised his glass, his voice low but warm. From today on, this place is no longer my home. This is our home. Naya looked at him, her deep black eyes shining with unprecedented trust. Awenata bowed her head and smiled slightly, her lips trembling but her face relaxed. Tala cheered, wrapping her arms around Ethan as if that declaration were the greatest gift of her life. Outside, the night wind whistled across the vast prairie, but inside the cabin, four people sat around the fire, their hearts bound by a courageous choice. They were no longer just a man and three Apache girls. They were family, a home born of loss, but held together by courage and love. That night, as the moonlight silvered the wooden roof, the cabin stood as a symbol. In the harsh West, Even the outcasts could find a place to belong. And sometimes, home isn't where you're born, but where you choose to stand together.